great to be here. Hi, everybody. Merry Christmas. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. So it's thrilled to be here, and I've been excited about being here.
We're really excited to have you. So I read off some of those accolades, and I've had the opportunity to just know your career more intimately, obviously preparing for this. But again, you know, total of 35 years in Major League Baseball in various roles, 3 All-Star games, 6 Gold Gloves, and a World Series. That's really remarkable. Looking back in your career, what would you say are some of kind of your crowning accomplishments or things that you're most proud of?
Well, I would say, from a personal standpoint, probably the Gold Gloves. I won 6, should have been 9. I'm still getting counseling for the other 3. Anyway, but I would say the '85 World Series, playing in a World Series is the most amazing thing to be involved in. I was with Kansas City, and we were not expected to win. We lost our first 2 games at home, and went to St. Louis and was able to win a couple there to bring it back to Kansas City. And we were the first team actually to come from a 3-1 deficit to win. And so the day of Game 7 was an interesting game, an interesting day. My dad, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a second, was probably more nervous than I was. And we had a house full of family members, and Janet saw the tension in my face, and she says, "Why don't we take the kids and go on a picnic to one of Kansas City's great parks?" And so we did, and we went out there, and I was sitting there in my head, and she says, where are you? And I go, well, I'm thinking about the game. And I have this feeling, all the games have been close, but I have this feeling it's going to be a blowout. The problem is I don't know which way which way it's going to be. And it was the most nerve-wracking day that I think I've had. But once I got to the ballpark, I was fine. Everything settled down, and everything was good. And after catching Brett Saberhagen in the first inning of the 7th game, I told Dick Hauser, the manager, I said, if we score 1 run, we'll win this game. That's how good he is tonight. His persona, his location, his stuff is so superb that if we score 1, we'll win. We were up 11-0 in the 5th inning, and it was the greatest single game playing that I ever played in. I remember thinking of days, the last 4 innings, think of days in Little League and all the years of kind of coming through and the difficulty of getting to that spot. You may play in it and not win. And I was in one time and was able to win it.
That's great. So what are some of your other more memorable stories just from your playing days that you think would be good to share?
Well, I caught a number of Hall of Famers, 9 Hall of Famers. My first was Ferguson Jenkins in my first Major League game. My last was Nolan Ryan. But Gaylord Perry was probably the most colorful and the older guys in here might remember him, but he was known for throwing a spitter. It was an illegal pitch, on which a foreign substance was placed on the ball to make it move and generally go down. And so guys would ask me, my own teammates would ask me, where'd he keep it? Because he's usually out there going through his hair and around his ears and fidgeting with his glove and stuff like that. And I go, I really don't know. Well, one game, I was not catching Gaylord, and I was determined to figure it out. So I sat next to him, and I noticed that he was, now you're in Texas, it's 105, and he has a jacket on and sweating terribly. And he's fidgeting around in his jacket, and then he pulls this towel up, and he goes like this. Closes his eyes, doesn't touch his face. Going like this. I'm thinking like, too many home runs have been hit from this guy, off this guy. And so I continue to watch, but What ended up happening was that I figured out. I went in late, sometime early, and checked in his jacket, and it got grease when my hand went into the pocket. I pulled it out, and it was a tube of KY jelly. So what he was doing is that when he had his hand in his pocket and fidgeting around, he was unscrewing the cap, squashed the gel onto his hand, and as he had the towel up and going like this, he was putting it all over his neck, and he was keeping his teammates from seeing that it was on his neck. Well, when I was catching him, I had to catch him, so I never saw him go to his neck. At what point is all of the attention off of the pitcher? You ever think about that? Right after he releases the ball's going in, the umpire's trying to call it, the hitter's trying to hit it, the catcher's trying to catch it, and he goes, so he has it on his finger here. Now, he doesn't apply the juice to the ball until he starts in his windup. And once he starts into his windup, you can't call timeout. I hurry up and threw the ball back. One time early on in catching him, I had a pickoff play with Mike Hargrove, and I threw the greatest spitter into right field over Mike's head that you've ever seen. And I never did that again. But he didn't like Reggie Jackson. And Gaylord kept throwing him spitters. And we get to count 1 and 2 on Reggie. And Reggie turns around to the umpire and says, look at that. He's itching and scratching. He's got that stuff all over him. Go on out there. And the umpire moseys on out there and takes his glove off, takes his hat off, comes back and says, heck, Reggie, I didn't find anything. Now, Dale Ford and Reggie are from the same state. Okay, so they kind of knew each other a little bit. And so the next pitch, what does Gaylord throw? Another spitter. Goes down. Reggie strikes out, goes nuts, goes crazy. Puts on a show for about 10 minutes, gets kicked out of the game. The umpire comes back to home plate, and he says, heck, Sonny, he goes, I've been umpiring for only 2 years. Gaylord's been throwing that for 22. Who am I telling not to throw it? So he got by with it. So it was, Gaylord was fun, great competitor.
And it's always better when he's on your team versus the other, right?
Yeah.
With that kind of a pitch. So other memorable pitchers that you've caught?
Fergie was the best control. Fergie and Greg Maddox were probably the best control artists that I caught, and probably in Major League history, they stick with that. Nolan was an icon. Raleigh Fingers, Gaylord, Burt Blyleven, caught a no-hitter with Burt Blyleven, and it was great. An interesting stat about Burt Blyleven is that he came off the disabled list to throw the game in Anaheim, and in the 7th inning, he re-injured his groin. I didn't know it, but his curveball was so good, all we threw the last 3 innings were curveballs. Because they couldn't, because he was favoring his groin, he was getting his arm out and really flipping the rotation of the ball, and it was really breaking. And a hitter could not get on top of that ball. They're going to hit it into the ground somewhere. And so we just played the infield to pull. Right-handers pulled over, left-handers, we played them to pull. And he had a no-hitter. And then after the game, not after the game, but right after that, he went on the DL and was traded in the offseason. So we went from throwing a no-hitter to being traded.
That's the most baseball thing I think I've ever heard. That's how it works. And it's such a challenging game, and for you to be able to play 16 years as a catcher, which is one of the more grueling positions in all of sports, is absolutely remarkable. Let's go back a little bit, because the journey to get to the point that you did and have the career you did, I don't think many people understand how hard that is. So can you take us back to just starting baseball and the path that led you to the majors in your career.
Okay. There are several things that I had to confront. I had a father that was really demanding and hard and strict, and he, I think, invented fear. He was afraid of everything. We used to practice in a car down a country road, ducking in case a deer would hit the windshield. And other things. And so, of course, I asked him late in his life, I said, did you ever get hit with a deer? He goes, no, never did. And, but when I started Major League Baseball, people would ask me, what's going to keep you out of the big leagues? And I said, my fear of flying. I was just made to fear flying. But my desire to succeed was greater than succumbing to the fears. I had, my whole career was taking one fear on after another and overcoming it. Early in my career, I pushed through it with my own will, and then later on, I asked the Lord to help out, and sure enough, it all happened. Another challenge was I was addicted to adrenaline, and every year, early in my career, when the off season occurred, I would spend the first month into depression. And it happened frequently. It happened for several years in the front. And after a period of time, I read a book called The Adrenaline Addiction. And so what happened is my system would get up every night, and the book said to wean off your body after the season. If you're in a high stressful job or you're very active, just to kind of wean it down from there. Don't just stop. I would just stop after the season, and my body would go into fits, and I would get depression. And I would say that was one of the consequences. That was because I wanted to succeed so much. I wanted to please Dad. And so it was such a drive, and it happened so frequently. If you had depression, and you've had it several times, you know there's a propensity to get it again. And I'm not really clean of that today. I have what I call one episode a year, where for about 7 days, I'm teetering on it. But God has given me the way out. He's given me the formula. I usually spend a lot of time in that period when it happens. I will sit at my computer and write out my prayers and sit and listen to what I hear back from him. The message is, the thing that gets me into it can be a little bit of stress or a message from childhood. And so I'll get in a conversation with the Lord, let the Holy Spirit talk to me about that situation. And within usually 7 days, I pull out of that and don't have to deal with it. But the consequences of all those years of grinding, pushing myself beyond my physical and emotional ability, I caught 1,400 games in my first 10 years. As Ryan was saying, I hold the American League record for 155 games. And I was fearful of getting out of the lineup. And I drove myself. I was afraid of failure, and I drove myself beyond my body's ability to deal with it. But thank God today that I'm no longer a slave to that, and I'm free.
Well, you also talked about high performers who fail are more susceptible to that type of depression, and what a career to choose, and probably what is one of the sport is built around failure, right? You know, in terms of it's grueling, and some of the best performers are actually worse than 50% at the plate. But one thing you said to me that I thought was interesting was you felt like you couldn't cry, you couldn't carry emotion, you couldn't share what was going on. Was that a mark of your life kind of leading up to that point?
Yeah, there was no crying in baseball, as the movie says, And I was not allowed to do that. In fact, my first counseling session happened not too long after I accepted Christ, because I was a mess in '77. I was winning awards. I was an all-star. I was making more money than I thought, and I was a mess. And I couldn't figure out why in the world am I going through this. So I went to Miners and Meyer, who used to, I don't know if they're still in this area or not, but I went to one of their counseling sessions, and I was talking to a guy, one of the counselors, and he was getting to know me, and I was talking, and then he said to me, well, how did that make you feel? I sat there and go, feel? What is that? What's a feeling? He goes, well, if that would have happened to me, that would have made me sad. And when he said that, I just started bawling. And so I learned what sad was as a feeling at 26 years of age. I was programmed to basically play baseball, and nothing was to get in the way. Feelings weren't acknowledged, and you put your head down and you go. And I would say that along that time, I was dealing with performance. Learning to let go of performance was a real key. There were times I probably tried too hard, and there were times I held on too tight. And I was on a road trip in Seattle. My wife, I got a call in the locker room, and the doctor said my wife had been pregnant, and she was in her last month. And the doctor said, Jim, Janet lost the baby this morning. I go, oh my gosh, so you got to play a game, You sit there and you go, what do you do? I checked flights. I try to get home early. The only flight was close to the one I would be going on with our charter flight. So I told the manager I'd stay, and he said, well, what do you want to play or sit? And I go, oh wow, okay, well, I don't want to sit and think about this. I'll play. Well, it ended up being the best game, one of the best games I ever had, and I didn't really care about how I did. And I saw for the first time a thing on the other side of performance, that you didn't have to try so hard, you didn't have to hold on to it, that I could actually give it over to God and say, get me through this. And sure enough, it did with flying colors.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And I know it all culminated to a point in Toronto in a hotel room. I'd love for you to kind of take it to that point and tell us about that night.
Well, I was raised religiously. We went to church every Sunday, and so I knew about religion, but I didn't know about relationship. And a relief pitcher, Adrian Devine, was talking. I heard him talking about a relationship with Jesus, and I said, well, tell me more about that. And so here I've been. We went to church religiously. When my mother passed away, and my dad stopped going to church at 90, I said, what's going on, Dad? And he goes, well, that church thing was your mother's thing, and I wanted to honor her. And so we went religiously, but I didn't know about having a personal relationship with Christ and the Father. I didn't know that. And when I first got into studying the Word, all I heard in the Word was, you're not doing good enough. You're not doing good enough. You're not doing good enough. And I was struggling with studying the Word, and that came from a moment when I was 10 years of age. Now, today you play the same age group, or maybe you might play up a year. Back when I was playing, there was a 9 to 12-year-old league. So there were 4 age groups. At 10 years of age, I hit 3 home runs in a game and struck out once. And after the game, Dad said, Jim, the time you struck out, you dropped your elbow. If you would have held your elbow up, you might have hit another home run. And so I saw myself through that window, not ever doing anything well, but always having fault. When I got to the big leagues, if I got one hit my first time up, I needed to get to that game. If I got two, my first 2 times up, I needed to get 3. I kept setting myself up for failure. And so in 77, when I said earlier that I was a mess and I accepted Christ, I really needed help. I needed to hear the love of a Heavenly Father. And so I learned very quickly that the God of heaven was not like my dad. Now, my dad worked hard. He worked 2 jobs. He was a letter carrier and a letter carrier and a bus driver. And he was always home at 2:30 to play baseball. That was the key. I remember him walking to work early in life when there was a foot of snow on the ground, you couldn't drive. He would walk to work. He was the most responsible. When he left the post office after 33 years, he had 14 months of sick leave built up, which was grandfathered in, and he was able to take that. He was dependable. He was faithful to my mom, but he was a religious guy. And so I needed to know what the relationship was, and my relationship started almost 50 years ago now. You can screw up a lot in 50 years.
So you gave your life to Christ in that hotel room in Toronto. What did that look like there in the moment?
I was reading the book, The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, and I'm going like, whoa, I never heard this before. Those things are going to happen here on Earth at some point in time? I don't want to be left behind. And so I peeled off onto my bed, on the corner of my bed, and I asked Christ to come into my life to begin shaping and molding me into the person he wanted me to be. And then as time went on, it went from being fear, because it was a fear-oriented decision, to a love relationship. As I learned more about him and more about his love and forgiveness, and I didn't have to be perfect, and I actually could fail a little bit, that was his grace would cover me, then that did it for me.
And I like what you said about there was something where you were writing letters to your earthly father, but receiving a letter back from your heavenly Father.
Right. I learned it actually it was my 3rd counselor, and he was a pastor, and I was telling him, it's interesting because I went to 3 counselors over 15 years, 3 different episodes over 15 years. I would get to where I was feeling better, and then I would stop going. And then that would take me a little farther, and I'd get to where I was feeling better, and then I would stop. Well, the last guy I had, which I love dearly, Buddy Westbrook, was a pastor, counselor, and he said one day, he goes, what does God say about that? And it's almost like the look I had was like when the first counselor asked me, what does it feel like? I go, I don't know. He said, well, you think you ought to take it to him and see? Well, I go, well, how do you do that? Now, I'm a believer. I've been a believer for a number of years, but I had no idea how to receive from the Holy Spirit. I had no idea what that looked like, what that felt like, what to look for. And so God rewarded me with the diligence over a period of time. He led me into, I had 4 journals that I ended up putting together where I would say, Dear Lord, and I would write out what the request was, and then I would sit and it would be, Dear Jim, Dearest Jim, my beloved. There were words of dear affirmation from God. And I would sit and listen. And sometimes I'd have to, nothing would come, and it was aggravating 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe sometimes longer, and sometimes I get frustrated and get up and walk into the other room. And so as time went on, I got skilled at it. I got to where I felt like I heard God speaking, what it sounded like, what the tone of it. I got in a frequency that I began to hear well. And so that's what I do today. When I told you earlier about depression, I touched on it, I get into a episode maybe once a year that lasts 7 days. I will sit at my computer and grind it out with him, and I will lay it out with him, and then I'll sit and wait and listen, and it's the most powerful thing that I've ever done. And by doing that, I'm able to sit in this room and receive from him. I'm able to be driving and receive from him. I'm able to be in a conversation and receive from him. And it's changed my life. It's the one, when Buddy Westbrook, the counselor, pastor, said, what does God think? I'm going like, I don't know. I've always just made a prayer, but I never sat and really listened to think what he might be saying to me. And so that took, that was a process of over a year of getting the journals done to a place where I felt comfortable. I would go back, God would lead me back to the journal, and then the next system was what was really of him, I would mark in yellow. I would highlight in yellow. And I felt like, and by the time I got through with the pastor, he said, you're getting pretty skilled at this. And so I had his affirmation, and it was encouraging. And today I do it with, when I get into a situation that's causing me to get anxious. And I know the way out.
That's great. That's very, very good advice. Speaking about God speaking to you, talk about some of the God moments. You gave some interesting stories after you became a believer.
I grew up watching the Cubs. I was a huge Cub fan. Didn't like the Cardinals. That's why when we beat them in the '85 World Series, it was such a thrill. Any Cardinal fans in here? Oh, there's a Cardinal fan. I thought so because you guys. I was with the Cubs, and it was on the tail end of my career. I'd started 13 years, and this was my 14th year in '87, and I wasn't playing. And I had a bad attitude. And I hadn't played in 2 weeks in this particular day. In Wrigley Field, as I watched games as a kid, and here I am again watching games, and the bench was such that you could kick your feet like this. And I was sitting there kicking my feet like this, talking to Scott Sanderson, another teammate of mine. And he was on the disabled list, great Christian guy. All of a sudden, I thought I heard my name mentioned. Did someone say my name? Yeah, the manager, Gene Michaels. Looks like he wants you to hit. You're kidding me. He is an idiot. He doesn't know a darn thing what he's doing. I haven't played in 2 weeks. How am I supposed to? He wants me to hit. You're right. He's an idiot. And so my faith started me to fight through that. My faith I was fighting through that. At one point, I felt like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, you know, where the little ugly bald-headed guy that had the ring, the princess. Oh, it's precious. Stop. Oh, but it's precious. And so I found myself going from he's an idiot to saying, Jim, stop it. Stop that. Okay? So I walked down, he goes, Jim, get a bat, I want you to hit. Well, because I hadn't played in 2 weeks, I didn't bring my bat or helmet to the dugout. I had to run up the tunnelway to the bat rack. They're yelling at me to get back into the dugout. The umpire has come over to the dugout yelling. I hear him. So I grab a bat and a helmet and start back into the dugout. And when I'm greeted by an angry umpire when I get to the dugout, I walk up the steps in Wrigley Field into the on-deck circle. And at this point, the only thing I know is we're playing the Padres. I don't know the outs, the inning, the score. I don't know. I haven't been paying attention. Guy hadn't played in 2 weeks. He's an idiot. I mean, what? I mean, how can you call on a guy who hadn't played in 2 weeks? And so I get in the on-deck circle, and the voice says, "Stop it, Jim. Stop. Stop. Get a game plan. You'll be okay." No, stop. So I started to process the game. I get in the on-deck circle. I went to put my helmet on. It was too small. It hurt my ears. It pinned my ears down, and I couldn't hear. And I looked at the bat, and it was an inch too small. So here I am. I start to, no, get a game plan. Get a game plan together. You'll be okay. And so I look out. We're in the 5th inning. Down 6-1. Bases loaded. Who's on the mound? I've never hit this guy. Stop. Get a game plan. You'll be okay. So I thought, well, the best thing I can do, having not played in 2 weeks, was to look at a ball out over the plate and just try to muscle it to the outfield and score a sacrifice fly. So the pitcher winds up. I get in. I felt like I swung with my eyes closed, but the ball goes, pow! Grand slam. And I remember running around first base going, that's the smartest manager I've ever seen in my life. And so and he never used me again, but it was a real encouragement. And I learned about pushing through adversity and confronting it and allowing God to come in there and tenderize.
That's great. And you have a similar story about the 1985 ALCS.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories. And the 85, I was a believer 8 years and had never really asked anybody to pray, any group of people to pray. And when you play in a high-profile game, players really are kind of fearful of the Billy Buckner play, like in the 86 World Series where the ball goes between it. Billy Buckner was a great Christian guy, I think he had 3,000 hits, but a good player, but everybody on the East Coast remembers the ball that went through his legs that lost the game. I was actually broadcasting in Boston and saw after the Red Sox had won the World Series, and the headline was, Boston finally forgives Billy Buckner, was the headline of that. And so you go into a game like that, and and I'm going like, and I'm still dealing with this fear stuff was kindling, and so I asked a group of people, there were the 8 people I asked to pray, and I think the reason I did that was because of what will I tell you about here in a second what happened. We got down, as I said, we got down 3-0 in the playoffs against Toronto, and came back to win. I was in the airplane after the win of Game 5, so we're down 3-2, and I'm sitting next to my wife, and we're traveling to Toronto, so the plane's going northeast, and beautiful thunderheads banging out on this side at a distance. And the sun over here was shining on them, and it was just gorgeous. And I was looking out and kind of thinking, and all of a sudden I heard in my spirit, something wonderful is going to happen. And it froze me. I never heard that before, that deep in my spirit. Almost audible, but not. It was so clear. And it caused me to tear up. And Janet said, there's no crying in baseball. No. She said, what's going on? And I said, I told her what happened. Well, we played Game 6, and there was no confirmation of what I experienced on the plane playing itself out in Game 6. We get to Game 7, 6th inning. I walk in the on-deck circle, runners at first and second, Steve Balboni hitting, and I hear in the same way, get ready, this is the moment. Look around. Bases will be loaded. And sure enough, a few more pitches go by. He walks, bases are loaded. And a hitter is processing the game in the on-deck circle. And I'm thinking, Dave Steve, who was really a good pitcher and had been tough on me, I thought to myself, what's he going to throw? Probably going to start me off with a slider. I'm going to look slider. I'm going to stay on another slider because I think he's going to try to do that. And so first pitch, slider. But it was on my shins, and I didn't swing at it. Next pitch, something, and here's what I think is etched in eternity, is that this was designed from the beginning of time for me as an encouragement and to give testimony today to the goodness of God and His faithfulness, because we are trained to only swing at what we're looking for. I was looking for a slider on the second pitch. And somewhere in the top of his windup, somewhere, he threw a fastball, and my hands just went. I didn't feel like I initiated him. I didn't stop it. And so I was late on the pitch, and the ball goes down into the right field corner, hits on top of the fence. If it goes out, it's a grand slam. If it stays in, you run, and it stayed in, and so I got a triple out of it. But the message there is that He is so good and faithful, and it was a gift He gave me in the overall gift of baseball that He gave me. And in the way He made me, it was a gift. And I'm forever grateful for that moment. I praise Him all the time.
Well, attributing that to Him too, certainly probably came at the right time, and you just asked some people to pray for you for the first time, and
right.
He was showing you that, hey, this is going to work. But
yeah.
We actually have a quick video of that hit that we wanted to play for a
great.
moment. You can find everything online now, by the way. While he's getting that to load, well, let me ask you this question while he's getting it to load. So let's go back to life after playing. So the front office years. So you went to straight to the Rangers front office pretty quickly after, and tell us about that experience, your role, the stories, and then obviously I'm going to ask you about Nolan and Brooker and that deal.
After broadcasting 6 years with the Rangers, I went into business because I always wanted to have my own business. And so I had come up with a product called the Practice Planner. It was a cool laminated guidebook with a video that the coach dad could take the laminated book to the field and stay organized in a practice session. And I sold a bunch of them over a few years. And I took it into softball. I divided the one product into 3 products. So at one point I had 11 products I was selling in Academy and what used to be Oshman's and a few other places. And I loved it. I loved being an entrepreneur. And I really think I have an entrepreneurial spirit, except you got to have a lot of money to be an entrepreneur. You got to have some deep pockets at times. So go ahead.
Here's the video.
So I'm thinking slider, here comes the fastball late.
In the air to right, Barfield going back. Look out for the wind. It hits the top of the fence, and I believe it's still in play. Yes, it is. 2 runs will score, 3 runs score. It's a triple for Sundberg. He missed a grand slam by the narrowest of margins. It hit the top of the fence, but as it is, it's a 3-run triple.
God wanted to keep me humble.
You haven't changed.
The wind
You look
keeps
great.
pushing it. Like the other base hit, Sundberg continues to try to go the opposite way out, Steve, to protect against that slider. Hits right on the middle pole.
Amazing.
You know,
How cool.
I heard Reggie Jackson. Thank you. Thank you. I heard Reggie Jackson one time say, after his career was up, and that was a situation. This is a situation there that you saw like it. He said, I get to the point where I can, off a right-handed pitcher, I can look for a slider and still hit a fastball. I can look for a slider and still hit a fastball. And so that was a situation where I was looking for a slider and still able, but I didn't have the talent he did, and but God, to his glory, that was a amazing God moment.
That's wonderful. Absolutely. So back to the front office, you know, with your role and your experiences there, what were some of your favorite stories in the front office?
Well, to pick up, we needed to take our product line and move it into a DVD versus a video, and needed to do some tweaks. And we'd spent a bunch of money. I wasn't going to spend any more money. And so Jen and I decided we would dissolve the business, sell off the rest of the product. And she says, why don't you go to the ballpark and ask Buddy Bell for a job? Buddy Bell was the manager of the Colorado Rockies, and he's a teammate and a good relationship with him. So I went out there. I didn't want to go. I said, Jen, I don't want to go back to baseball. I really want to be an entrepreneur. I don't want to go back to baseball. But you have all the wisdom, Janet, and I'm going to follow, because if I'd have followed half the things you said, it wouldn't have had as many troubles. But anyway, so I went out to the ballpark, saw Buddy. Buddy said, I'd love to have you on my team, but I'm going to get fired after the year. So I walked out and I went, yes, God, hallelujah. I don't have to come back to baseball. So I'm kind of upbeat, and I walked to the place where the carpet goes from the locker room down to the